All right, so before we begin, I would just like to state for the record that today is September 22nd, 2021, and my name is Ben Bauman. I'm here in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I'm speaking via phone with Darrell Felling, who is in Terre Haute, Indiana, and we are doing an interview for the Indiana Legislative Oral History Initiative. So just starting off, when and where were you born?
I was born on June 12th of 1947 at St. Anthony Hospital in Terre Haute, Indiana.
Okay, and what were your parents' names?
My father's name was Edward, and my mother Maxine, and my dad was a lifetime, that time, three-generation farmer, and my mother was a 27-year elementary school teacher.
Oh, okay, wow. And let's see, where was your family from before Indiana?
Germany.
Okay.
Migrants. As a matter of fact, my great-grandpa came over on the boat with Tony Holman Sr.'s. I can't remember if it was his grandfather or his great-grandfather, and they both settled just about 2 miles apart in what is now the east side of Terre Haute, and they didn't teach me a whole lot of German, but I did learn a little Spanish at DePaul to earn my BA degree.
Oh, okay. Interesting. All right. And did you have any siblings growing up?
Yes, I have. Actually, my brother and sister are twins.
Oh, wow.
And Charlie is my brother, who's 18 months younger than me, and my sister Carol is, obviously being a twin, is also 18 months younger than me, and we've had a very close relationship. My brother took over the family farm, and he has continued to operate it. And my sister got her doctorate degree at Ohio State and did some counseling work, and now she's retired.
Oh, okay. Sure. So, how would you describe your childhood overall?
Well, I have to say overall that it was wonderful. I had a loving mom and dad. Dad taught me a lot about farming, the outdoors. My mother was fantastic, school teacher, and she helped students more down at the Riley Elementary School, it was only about 10 miles south of our house here in east part of Eagle County. Ironically, my daughter was at her 50th high school reunion this past weekend, and there were only 25 of them that came, but out of the 25, 2 of them approached her and told her how much they loved my mother and had her as a school teacher at Riley, and they still have their poetry books and keep them and read them from time to time that my mother dearly loved and taught, and everybody just loved Mrs. Felling in the 5th grade. She was not only an awesome school teacher and person, but she also just was wonderful with raising us and teaching us right from wrong, and whatever you do, make sure your word is solid and good and keep a good reputation, because they're hard to get back if you lose them.
Yeah, sure. That's always really cool. I know teachers love that when students remember them and come back and talk about them, so that's cool.
Yeah, and even our prosecutor here, Terry Modisett, he's been in for going on 4 years or 4 terms now. Him and his twin brother had my mother at Riley.
Oh, wow.
And he, at her funeral, actually read one of the poems that he had written in my mom's class and kept all those years. And it was very, very touching.
That's awesome, yeah. Very cool, okay. And so, would you say then your parents were the most influential people then in your life growing up as a kid?
Yes, I would, and my two sets of grandparents spent a lot of time with them as well, and they were my grandfather had fought in World War I as a medic, and my dad's father was on the farm, and at that point they preempted some of the farmers from the war in order to keep the food supply rolling and plenty of farming needs that needed to be done. So we knew most of our neighbors by first name and helped each other, and there were just some wonderful people, in the entire county, well, in the entire state for that matter. I just didn't know the rest of the state till I got to the state house.
Sure. Understandable. Yeah, that kind of makes me think then, what, if any, did you know about your family's political beliefs as a child?
Pretty much everything. My mother was a Democrat. My dad was a Republican. They discussed the elections. I would be at the table some of the times in my younger days, and then finally my dad kind of got mad at the local school board, Lost Creek Township, and he said, "By golly, I forget what he said, something about they're not doing this right." And so my mother spoke up and said, "Well, Edward, why don't you run for the school board?" He said, "Okay, I'm going to. I'm going to see if I can fix that, whatever that issue was back then." And he did win, and he was elated, and he got it changed. And after he served the one term, he decided, I think that's enough for me. I got changed what I wanted, and then I came along, I guess, as the next politician in the family, and worked out quite well.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I guess seeing your dad go through that process probably had some influence on you later on.
Yes, it did. It certainly did.
And thinking about your education as a kid, remind me, what schools did you attend?
Okay, I attended ISU's lab school, they called it. It's where they did their student teaching and there was a high school. It's now called the Evan By Educational Center, that was dedicated in the By family name because he was from over here.
Okay.
And it was a small high school, and I was one of 55 graduates there. I loved basketball. We upset all the big schools in the county my senior year and won the sectional, went on to the regional, and that was big stuff back in those days. And I was pretty good student. I will admit that I like to socialize, and I work on the farm and do a lot of other things. So I would say I was probably a solid B student. Probably could have done better had I applied myself more, but I had a lot of activities and a lot of things to do otherwise as well.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Did you have any favorite subjects in school?
Yes, I think government right off the get-go was one of my favorite, and I just dearly loved history, both U.S. and world, but probably more U.S. And my mother taught me, unlike most lawyers and doctors, to do excellent penmanship. And she was an excellent writer, and to this day, I still get people that say, "You're one of the few attorneys I can actually read your name when I sign a document or whatever."
Yeah.
So I give her the credit, because all it is just a matter of taking a few extra seconds to write it out clearly.
Yeah, true. Were you involved in any extracurricular activities?
In high school?
And yeah, in school in general and stuff, yeah.
Yes, I was president of the student legal council, or the student body council, which was like, the governing body for student affairs and matters.
Right.
And I was the first person as a junior to get elected president, because those were races between various candidates. And then I won re-election my senior year, and I was also at DePaul University. I was president of the International Foreign Relations Club.
Wow.
And that was interesting because that's when DePaul really opened up to international students. I mean, we had probably maybe 50 to 100 back in 1969, but after that, with our professor's leadership, Dr. Amir Rafat, and I was the president of the club, we did some new things, and it really helped DePaul move forward in the international community in that regard. So I was active both in high school, various clubs, of course, and a lot of time in sports, and then the same thing at DePaul. And I really loved DePaul University and still do to this day.
Yeah, it sounds like it was a really cool experience for you. So.
And it was pretty neat, too, that my son and I have a law office in Greencastle that I opened up, and I had one in Terre Haute before that. DePaul hired him to teach Introduction to Law as an attorney in town and with some education background. And he did that up until he moved back over to Terre Haute.
Oh, okay.
So he graduated from DePaul, and my youngest daughter graduated from DePaul, and she is an attorney down in Houston, Texas.
Wow, okay. That's cool. What views did you have about the state of Indiana growing up?
What word did you use?
What views did you have about
views? Okay,
yeah.
I got it. Well, I always thought Indiana was a great state. It had good balance. I didn't really realize until I got elected, just here in my own county, how much is out there in towns like Tecumseh and several others that are, little places, population of maybe 50 or 100 or whatever, that you didn't know existed there except on the map.
Yeah.
And boy, when I got into the legislature, it was a tremendous education, and frankly, one of, if not the most greatest opportunities that I as a person ever had. I didn't realize that when I ran. I was running on a political platform of some things I didn't think were being done properly in this county, including the way they voted absentee and some irregularities there. And I got that changed couldn't get a bill through because, politically it was impossible.
Yeah.
But I did approach our then Attorney General. His name was Theodore Sindak, and this was back in 1976, 77, my first term. And I explained the whole problem to him, that the Democrats pretty well controlled this county. And even though I was a Democrat, I got complaints from the Republican Party, because I was kind of the independent type, that they were voting people that were confined to nursing homes in various places without both parties being represented when the people were given the ballots, and they were explained to them and then voted, and then supposed to be initialed by a member of each party. The Republican party was fairly weak, and it didn't respond until it came to me through their chairman and said, "Hey, will you look into this, because that's not following current law?" And I said, "Sure." And Mr. Sendek, who was a very strong-powered attorney general, I will say, probably one of the best we've had, or at least in the top three to five, in my opinion. And so he issued an attorney general's opinion that said that this practice had to cease statewide, and that Eagle County especially, if they did not comply with the current law and had both parties present and initials in place and everything done by the book, that they were going to convene a grand jury to check into it if it happens again, and the law would be strictly enforced.
Wow.
Needless to say, the Democrat County Chairman, which I was the party of, the Democrat Party, because of my mother's influence, was not very happy with me, and so my Democrat opponent in the primary, and then I always had a Republican opponent in the fall, because it was a pretty lopsided Republican district. So,
Yeah.
but I was lucky to win it all three times with the help of my family and my friends here in Eagle County.
Wow. So that sounds pretty crazy. Essentially, just the absentee voting process was not following regulations, and sounds like the Democratic Party, where you were from, wasn't really doing anything to change that.
No, they were the ones responsible for it.
Right.
Yeah, the Republicans were the ones that, of course, they were in the minority anyway, and the party was almost defunct at one point before I got elected.
Okay.
Even though I was not a Republican, but
Yeah.
yes, it changed the dynamics, because the next election, the favored Democrat County Chairman, who was in at the time I got that opinion, and who was running the show in Eagle County, so to speak, he ran for circuit judge, and an unknown attorney by the name of Hugh McQuillan ran against him, and nobody thought a Republican could win that election on that level, and he upset Ralph Berry, in part because of that attorney general's opinion, and the public was kind of disgusted with the way they had operated.
Yeah. Wow. So I imagine there was probably a lot of pressure then from your party of people upset with you, kind of helping out balance the scales between the Republican Party and Democratic Party then?
Well, to a great degree, I mean, we still had mutual respect for the individuals, and most of them were good people in both parties.
Yeah.
The thing that you might find interesting right at the moment is that the Republicans, the Democrats tried to beat me in the primary. Of course, the Republicans tried to beat me in the fall.
Right.
And I had to run 6 elections, 3 primaries and 3 general elections. And finally, the only way the Republicans could figure out how to get me out of office was to gerrymander. And
Oh, wow.
I had, and I don't think there's, you should really, my district was the 50th district, which was basically the east half of the city of Terre Haute, the east side of Terre Haute, and the south side of Terre Haute. They took my house, where I lived at the time, in southern part of Terre Haute, and they just took a line and drew it straight across Clay County, Owen County, into Monroe County, to a little town called Bean Blossom. I'd never been to Bean Blossom before. I'd seen the name down on US 37,
Yeah.
or 31, whichever. but I did not know a soul in the Democrat or the Republican Party in any of those counties, let alone all those precincts. So I decided at that point that I would have to start politically over, and I had a young family at that point. I had three girls and a son, and I thought, in fairness to my family, I can't go out there and spend the kind of time I need to do to get acquainted with people I've never met, never known, and at that point I was ready to move on from politics.
Yeah, sure.
But that district was unbelievably just looked like a little snake went across the state and just destroyed the district that I had, and really pulled a lot of power in the process of the Republican Party doing that away from Terre Haute, because I had given consideration to running for statewide office after 1982.
Yeah.
And I know they got wind of that, and so that further fueled the fire to see if they could eliminate me at the ballot box sooner than later.
Wow. Well, that's sounds like a pretty sad state of affairs, where after basically helping the Republican Party with the voting issue, they help push you out later through gerrymandering.
Yes. It surely did.
Just kind of shows a lot of the issues in the I guess the not only state political system, but the American political system when it comes to different things that people can tinker with to affect politics.
Sure.
Wow.
Well, there's no question. The current way they draw the census and analyze it and redraw the districts really is something that should be taken away from the politicians themselves, because obviously whichever party's in power is going to draw the lines and the maps and the districts, and put it in an independent commission, not appointed by politicians, but done on however most other states do it. I can't answer that, but do it fair and square, so we keep the best people in office rather than eliminate those you don't like because they don't say or follow the game rules of the party.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it does sound like it's kind of, you either are kind of blindly loyal to a party, or else you are at risk of being kind of pushed out of that party.
Yes, that is true, and and then I might add, one of my milestones in getting legislation through was in 1978. State Representative Dennis Avery from Evansville, a Democrat, a colleague of mine, and myself filed a lawsuit against the state of Indiana because of the way they operated the license branches. And back in those days, the political party of each county that was dominant would, from the governor's office, automatically be in charge of the license branches on the county level, and then the county chairman of that party, Democrat or Republican, would basically handpick his chosen few to run the license branch, and they were able to keep most of the profits that were generated from the license plates for the benefit of the political party. When Dennis and I investigated that, it appeared that there were very few records filed in Indianapolis about how much money was collected, how much their expenses were, where the net dollar landed up, which usually was in the political party account, and then they dispersed that for who they picked to run for whatever state or county office. So that was actually using state revenue for the benefit of the two-party system, and obviously it had gone on for years.
Yeah.
And the parties loved it, and so Dennis and I filed the lawsuit down in Evansville federal court, and I could tell you this unequivocally. I knew later, after we won the lawsuit, that was the final nail in my coffin for that gerrymandering, because I could see and heard rumors that they really hated us, the hardcore party politicians, that is, in the state, because of that lawsuit, and we tried to settle out of court with them to just pass a bill and change it, and they thought, oh no, we can snowball this and we'll win this case, and they sure found out they were dead wrong. And
wow.
And one twist I have to throw in, because I always respected Evan Bayh and the current mayor of Indianapolis, but when they later ran after 1982 for state office, they both took credit for reforming the license branch system. And in fact, they did play a part in reforming it, but what they didn't speak of was the lawsuit. The federal court mandated the parties to reform it, or else they were going to take it over or abolish it completely. And put it in the hands of the state, as it should have been. But anyway, I never said a word or complained to anybody, and I'm not complaining at, Evan Bayh did do some work on it at that point, but that's not what changed it. It was already changed by the federal ruling. And I know Joe Hogsett, when he ran for Secretary of State, mentioned license branch reform was something that he took credit for as well.
Okay.
So that's just a little twist on politics.
Yeah, sounds like it. Yeah. I guess by the time you were done with sort of state politics, you were not terribly popular with either party in terms of the hardcore party members, I guess.
You hit the nail right on the head. And I was always civil with them, and they were civil with me. But I knew, or they knew, that they could not manipulate me, or on the other side, if they could convince me that something was wrong that needed to be changed, I would analyze it and get several different opinions, and before I did anything, and then if I agreed with them, I would help them. If I didn't, I would stay neutral. But I think, among other things, we had pushed for another interstate interchange for the benefit of Terre Haute, which we badly needed back in the late 70s. And I finally convinced the state chairman of the Transportation Committee to hold a hearing in Terre Haute, and they did, and they all voted in favor of a new interchange study committee, and went back over to Indianapolis, and lo and behold, the next year they never appointed an interim study committee for the new interchange for Terre Haute. So we never got it until about 10 years ago. So, which is almost too little, too late. That's why the 641 bypass is there.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with that.
Right.
So anyway, but again, as I said at the outset, I feel good what I was able to accomplish as an individual legislator, and with the help of a lot of others. Oh, one other twist.
Yeah.
Two other twists I'll give you. When I first got elected, the Democrats, we didn't have probably 35, maybe 40 Democrats, and always been in the minority pretty much, except for a few times Pat Bauer, back in the Evan Bayh days when he was governor, that the Democrats could win the House. So anyway, the bottom line was, I sat in the very last seat my freshman year, seat number 99, across from the Republicans, like the rest of the Democrats were.
Yeah.
And by the 2 years later, the Democrat House Caucus, the people that I worked with, including Mike Phillips, a well-known former Speaker of the House from down in southern Indiana, he was reelected minority leader by the Democrat House members, and I was elected assistant minority leader, and I think principally because a lot of the Democrats would come to me on borderline issues,
right,
where if they voted this way, they might not win their next election, or they voted the other way, and I tried to help them find a common ground to work their way through to get done what was needed, but at the same time stay politically alive at the next election. So I was really overwhelmed that they came to me and asked me to take that position, and I served that 2 terms, including my third term, and that was a fun experience because I really got to know the rest of the state of Indiana.
Oh, sure.
Through those individual legislators, and I still feel at home going through almost any county to this day that I could pull over and you can't get a phone book, but look them up on the internet and go over and say hi, and if they're still there, and by golly, we still remain friends all these years.
Yeah, that's cool. So thinking about just, kind of how you served as a legislator, I mean, it sounds like you were kind of unique because you were very much independent of party influence, it sounds like, quite a bit. What would you attribute that to? Why were you someone who really, tried to go down the middle, I guess?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll give my mother credit. Excuse me. Number
Sure.
one, and a legislator who was just an outstanding person and a friend of mine. His name is John Thomas. John was a Republican from our neighboring county, Clay County, in the city of Brazil.
Yeah.
And when I first got elected, he was really the only legislator I knew personally as an attorney, because he was an attorney also. And so we met in the courtrooms and worked together on different cases. And so when I arrived at the State House, John kind of took me under his wing and showed me where the bathrooms were, and said, "Hey, Darrell, anytime you need anything or you have a question about a bill, you feel free to ask me, and I'll help in any way." And I had the same respect back for John.
Yeah.
And so John Thomas always, he said to me, and I'll never forget it, he said, "Always analyze every word of the bill to make sure you didn't miss something that could be very important later. And number 2, always analyze the people that are behind the bill to find out for sure what their real motive is, and that it's not some kind of a smokescreen for, something like the license branches, for example."
Yeah.
And I took that creed from him, and I practiced it, and I asked him a lot of questions my freshman year, I know, but he if he didn't have an immediate answer, he would go around about, and I think he was the assistant majority leader in the Republican Party too, so he was not any, small potato by any means.
Right.
And well respected, and I might add, a very religious man that I respected the way he conducted himself at all times, and just a wonderful man. So John gets number 1 credit, and then, like I said, my mother and her influence, and just I was able to make friends pretty quickly once I got to know people, and they knew where I was coming from versus, just trying to make headlines or whatever attack they wanted to make on me. So that's kind of the way that went. But it as you can tell, is still a very soft spot in my heart, and it always will be, and one I'm very proud of.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's really cool. It also kind of makes me think about, considering that your background was having parents who were from different political parties. I imagine that could have possibly had some influence as well. That since your father was a Republican, or
yes, sir, it surely did. Especially the year that my first race was Jimmy Carter running for president. So my mom, not being a farmer, was for Jimmy Carter because she liked him and thought he was a nice, good man. And my dad, of course, said, "Oh, he's a farmer. He's going to make a great president." And so I remember several lively family conversations back in the old days.
Yeah.
And then of course it reversed in 1980, and my dad was very upset with Jimmy Carter not helping the farmers that he had promised, and of course Ronald Reagan came along, and I really liked Ronald Reagan and his thinking. So even though I was on the ticket, I voted for Ronald Reagan for president in 1980.
Oh, wow.
Not that I advertised it, but it was my dad's influence, because he did likewise as well. First time he voted for a Republican. On the other, on the national level, he usually would skip. If he didn't care for either one, he didn't vote for either one.
Okay. Interesting. So it sounds like then your dad wasn't like a hardcore Republican, but more kind of a moderate then in terms of voting. Yes, he wasn't big into politics. It was just that one school board issue. Yeah. That really stirred him, and he was right on it. I can't remember all the details, but a lot of people came up to him after he won and said, "Oh, Ed, we're glad you won, and get that changed just like you said, because that was ridiculous what that previous board had done." And I don't remember what it was specifically now, but anyway, I guess I just was kind of molded into a Republican Democrat combined, and tried to be of my own mindset and try to do what I thought was right. Once you get all the facts, and may not be the most popular. Sometimes it was the most popular, but popularity had really nothing to do with what was right or wrong. True. Yeah, that's a good point. Let's see. Backtracking a little bit. After you graduated from DePaul, what was your plan after that? My plan was to go to law school, and I was ingrained with that from my mother's influence. I said to her, probably my freshman year in high school or thereabouts, that, "Mom, if I want to become a lawyer," strike that. I had just read the book Ambassador, and I can't remember if Stevenson wrote that book or who it was, but I was very impressed with it. So I asked her, and this is how naive of a farm boy I was, to become a lawyer, what would be the best thing to do to get that kind of a job? Because it sounds interesting. And she says, "Well, I think you probably need to be a lawyer." And so I went all the way through high school. Even in our high school yearbook, I wrote, "Hope to see you all soon, not in the courtroom, but someplace where we can have a friendly drink and talk about old times, and maybe a little law on the side." So I never looked back from that book and my mother's influence, and I'm glad I did what I did, and I enjoyed 2 weeks ago
was my 49th year of law practice in Indiana.
Oh, wow.
And I've enjoyed 90% of it. I will admit, like any lawyer would, if they were being straight, it's not all pleasant, and sometimes it gets ugly. And
Yeah.
these days, it seems like it even gets uglier than the old days. Kind of look tame a little bit.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate.
It is. And I'm hearing that from a lot of other professionals, too, just besides the legal profession.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like that has become a societal problem in general. So.
Well, I'm afraid you're exactly right. And I always thought that, ethics was the bottom line. And I served on the education committee, the ethics committee, and I always refused to sit on any kind of attorney or law related, because I felt like, it could be a conflict of interest on the subject matter being voted on, and I didn't want to be in that situation. And I knew there were other attorneys there with more experience than me anyway, so
yeah,
it would be better suited to do those things. One real quick story, if it just came to mind.
Yeah.
This was probably in the late, either 78 or 79, might have been 1980. A big dispute came up in Indiana about whether motorcyclists should be required to wear helmets when they operate a motorcycle on a public street. And a lot of the ABATE was created for the bikers, and then there was a group in Indianapolis that more or less opposed the bikers and what they wanted. And so I thought, well, I gotta read on this. So I went to a meeting of ABATE of about 80 to 100 bikers in a room, and me, the sole legislator, and I told them that I had researched this, and what I would recommend is a compromise, that there does need to be a helmet law for beginning operators, because they do not know the perils of riding on the streets on a two-wheeled motorcycle. And yet at the same time, for you veteran riders, you should be exempt as long as you take a test, which is the current law on motorcycle endorsements.
Mm-hmm.
And when you should wear a helmet because of where you're going to be riding. If it's out on the county roads, you decide. But if you're on 465, you better have a helmet on. And the legislature passed that bill. I think it's been tweaked once or twice since.
Wow.
And became law. But when I left that meeting, most of those bikers got the opinion that I said everyone should have to wear a helmet at least some point in time, that I was going to oppose them for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a bunch of very angry letters in the mail before I realized that they misinterpreted what I had said. And when I sent them the bill, they were thrilled to death, because they said, yes, you're right. Beginning operators, that's that endorsement time frame until you either, I forget the specific rule, but you have to have some experience as a rider before you're exempt from wearing a helmet.
Right.
But when I left that meeting, I didn't know if they were going to throw me out the window.
Yeah.
Or drag me out the front door or the back door and beat the snot out of me or what. But it turned out I became friends with many of them after we got the final law passed, or the final bill. Yeah,
that definitely takes some special navigating, I guess, when it comes to trying to pass laws on kind of these cultural aspects of society, like biker culture. You can, I guess, easily upset people if say the wrong
Yes.
things.
And it was really my fault. I didn't get myself explained clearly. And then when they saw the bill, they were all smiles. But it was there were a few tense moments, and
Yeah.
I'm not I'm 6'2", but I'm not exactly what you call a bully or a fighter as such. So
Yeah.
I would have been in bad shape if they had done to me what they wanted to do to me.
Yeah. Yep, I understand that. So,
And
yeah.
last but not least, I can tell you that during your service, I think I can speak for a lot of legislators, since I at least was in one role of leadership, that notwithstanding personalities, notwithstanding party politics, back in the 70s, at least during the term I was there, in the early 80s, there was, to a great degree, civility, respect, and I would say having honor to being a legislator, being called a politician, being a Republican or a Democrat.
Yeah.
And that element started slipping by, I think, following, I don't mean just my departure, but after 1982 anyway. And I did a little lobbying work, and I saw how really ugly the politics got in those channels, like when the Riverboat Bill passed and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That it had become a backstabbing, underfighting, dirty politics in some respects. Not all of it, but some of it, to the point that it was becoming concerning. And of course, now you know what's going on everywhere.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. Do you think there is any specific aspects of the political system in Indiana that made it head in that direction, or?
Well, I mean, just like with the redistricting,
Yeah.
I mean, here we are, and I'll just use my example in how they changed the map in 1980 on my single district. I know it's happening. I looked at the map and saw what they did to a couple of representatives, congressmen they put in the same district, and legislators too. And so I just think it should be out of the hands of the people that are going to be running to draw the maps. I mean, it's kind of a built-in self-conflict.
Yeah.
And party-grabbing, power-taking method. So it's not hard to put it in a computer and print it out with all the elements that need to be in it regarding the geographics, and I think you could probably get a darn near fair balanced map. Granted that there are population areas here and low populations area there in different areas. So, but I think a computer could figure it out these days.
Yeah.
With the right programming.
Sure.
And then we lay to rest what really is the reason why the Republicans have dominated for so long. I can't remember the last time. Let's see. I guess Pat Bauer was Speaker of the House after I had left. So there was a Democrat that was Speaker, and then of course Mike Phillips had been before I left.
Right.
But nevertheless, there still were, and you know how many governors. I mean, Evan Bayh's tenure and Frank O'Bannon, who, by the way, was one of my favorite Democrats. He was solid as a rock, honest as the day is long, would work with anybody, kind of like John Thomas, Representative Thomas I mentioned.
Yeah.
And I just love Frank. he was such a fair man, and he would always call in both sides and hear their story if it was controversial, and then tell them before the fact. He announced it of how he made up his mind and why, so none of them were surprised or had reason to get mad at him. And he was just a country gentleman and lovely wife to boot.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's cool. So it kind of sounds like then some of these legal tools in politics, like gerrymandering, and I guess some people would say also like political lobbying, kind of over time could be manipulated more and more to help sort of push kind of this increasing political divide. Does that make sense?
Jobs or whatever for their own personal gain versus what's good for the government and serving all the people and balancing all of that out to keep it fair and balanced, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that's not an easy task, but it's a doable task. And it's been done before because I've seen it.
Yeah, I guess there's this, considering you're around lots of different politicians all the time when you served, and I guess if you're involved with some lobbying later on, did you see people in the state government who in the legislature that would kind of become more politically edgy almost, or like a little bit more kind of interested in preserving political power for themselves with their party over time? I'm just curious to see, like, is it just new people getting elected that are kind of wanting to play politics more, or is it people kind of changing over time in this political system as it's evolving?
Well, I have to be honest with you, being these many years after the fact, to speak to what's going on right now, I'm frankly at a total loss. I saw the early erosion of some of these elements that you spoke of that were starting to get into power plays and self-gain and whatever, be them the casinos or be whatever, and I'm concerned now that it's moved even way beyond that, to a point of, I hope it's not to a point of no return, but I think it's going to take probably something really nationally or worldwide that's going to have to open everybody's eyes, hopefully not the wrong way, but the right way, or at least the correct way, and get back to fundamentals and get back to being, if you're a man or a woman of your word, and regardless of which religious faith you have, but have a faith and be true to it. I think we're just going to have to go back to the fundamentals and try to bring it back in the back way, and I don't see any hope at the top right now. So it's kind of a scary scenario.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear, because you kind of echo what I've heard from many former members of the Indiana General Assembly, where many of them just say they don't recognize politics anymore, not only nationally but just within the state of Indiana. So it is kind of almost scary to hear just how much it's changed from the political issues of when you served to today, I guess.
Yes, I would definitely concur 100%.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Thinking back again to, what was your first job when you got out of law school?
My first job out of law school, let's see. I started a solo practice in Terre Haute and shared an office between two other attorneys that were well established, and they gave me one. Is gentleman's name is Jack Mankin, and he had been a former state senator, and I had met him and respected him a lot, and so he helped me on my civil cases. And then there was a gentleman with the name of Woody Nasser, who was a well-known criminal defense attorney in Terre Haute, and I shared the other half of the office with him. And then later, Mr. Nasser and I became law partners, and then we had a four-man law firm there at the corner of 3rd and Ohio, right across from the courthouse, for close to 20 years. And then Jack passed away, and then I struck out on my own and opened the Greencastle branch office because of DePaul mainly, and then my son came into practice with me after he got out of law school.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. And so what was your career goal then? Was it just to have your own practice and continue to do that the rest of your life, or?
Well, I guess I can say yes and no. The practice I thoroughly enjoyed in the early days, kind of like the legislative days. It became not as enjoyable as time went on. I would say probably 10, 12 years ago, as just a guesstimate of when things started turning south in the legal profession, when people would not be forthcoming and straightforward and honest about matters, and an element of greed in the profession I saw kind of disturbed me, and so I eliminated some areas of practice. I was what you call a general practitioner, but I specialized in personal injury cases and high-line criminal defense cases, and that's pretty much what my son does now, except he's also the Terre Haute City attorney. And bottom line, I just I don't know quite what to think, what it's going to take to get society back to doing what's right versus what's expedient and what's best for me, and the heck with the rest of it type attitude.
Yeah, that seems like we've drifted pretty far out there, at this point. So.
yeah, and I'm still an optimist at heart.
Yeah.
It has to be to go through all those battles. I still am a believer personally in this. I'm not trying to get into faith, but I believe in God, and I believe we're going to turn the tables some way, somehow, hopefully for the best. And and I'll never quit fighting for what I think is, and believing what I think is right, and try to do the right thing and convey that to other people as well.
Right, sure. Thinking a little bit about your family, when did you get married?
I got married in my senior year of high school.
Oh, wow, okay. So, pretty young.
Yes, very young. Too young because that marriage terminated, let's see, in 1985, I think it was.
Okay.
And I remarried, and we had one son, my wife Jill, 3 daughters by my first wife Chris, and my son Eddie, named after my middle name, and my father is in charge of the family more or less, and frankly we took a real turn for the worst in April. My wife had gotten cancer 2 years ago, breast cancer, and she unfortunately passed away April 14th, and I've never been the same since.
I totally understand. That's terrible. I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, she was a wonderful woman. She lobbied with me. She campaigned with me, and she was dearly loved by a lot of people, and enjoyed virtually everything that I tried to do in both politics as well as in the legal arena. And our clients loved her, and constituents loved her, and she was a wonderful woman.
Yeah, sounds like the ideal situation then, to be able to have someone you can work with throughout your life and stuff. That's cool.
Yes, sir. Yes, and not very many people have the luxury to say that. But
yeah, definitely.
She was the main drive, and to a great degree, great success all the way around for everyone involved and anybody she came in contact with.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Let's see. When did you first become seriously involved in politics and wanting to run for the General Assembly?
I guess it was in 1975, and I can't remember now. I'm embarrassed to say that there was some big political issue in Terre Haute, but not big statewide. And I remember the incumbent was on the other side of my view on it, and so I went in to see a gentleman by the name of C. Joseph Anderson, who was our circuit court judge, and I said, "Judge, can I talk to you privately? I'm thinking about running for state representative, and I would value your opinion." And Joe was very opinionated and almost immediately said, "Well, Darrell, let's see. We've got the richest Democrat in town, son running on the Democrat Party. We've got this guy running here, this guy running there, and the incumbent's a Republican. I would say you probably can't win the primary."
Yeah.
That's what I was worried about at the time.
Right.
And because of my mother. And so I said, when I shut the door, I said to myself, I'm going to prove the judge wrong. And I campaigned my tail off from scratch and had a lot of wonderful people help in all walks of life and never looked back.
Interesting. Okay. And it's interesting that that particular judge was talking about how wealthy one of your competitors were. How big of a role did money play in running a campaign and elections at that time?
Well, I'm trying to remember how much I spent. I think I spent about $1,200, and to be frank with you, I'm thinking about 1,000 of it came from my own family and my own pocket. But the head man candidate that was put up by the Democrat Party, his dad ran the biggest construction company in Terre Haute, and if his company didn't build it, nobody did, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And there were always questions about this, that, and the other, and some ethics at times, and so that kind of stirred me up a little bit. I never attacked Mr. Haley on that subject. It was kind of common knowledge on the street, and everybody figured there's nothing anybody can do about it, so we'll just have to live with it. And but what they didn't know, there was a buzzsaw called a school teacher out at Riley and a former school board member out at Saleyville that knew a lot of people and were well respected by a lot of people, and I inherited that, thank God, from them. And we were able, through a lot of hard work and determination and trying to make government better, that we won. And if I still been a Democrat opponent every election, including the mayors were always Democrat till recently, and that's why my son is Purdue.
Yeah, can you? Yeah.
Am I fading a little bit?
Yeah, you're fading a little bit. I was just wondering if you could repeat that part of, just backtrack, I guess, last maybe 15 seconds of what you were saying. I couldn't really hear.
Okay. Yeah. The bottom line, we did have one Republican mayor back in the 60s, Leland Larison, and Lee was former county clerk and a really good guy. But he lost to Bill Brighton, who was a very popular Democrat. But the bottom line, Duke Bennett ran, as a Republican, because if he ran in the primary against a Democrat, he would lose because there weren't enough Republicans still to this day to get you elected as a Republican in the city of Terre Haute. And he was able to do that, though, not only once, twice, 3 times. I think this may be going on his 4th term. But he was able to do that with much of the philosophy, I think, that I've stated, of he knows everybody by first name. He doesn't play party politics. He runs a clean ship. He's a man of faith. He's this and he's that, and you rarely ever hear either party badmouth our current mayor because he does it by the book.
Yeah.
And tries to help people in whatever subject or area they need help in. So he's refreshing for our great little city here on the west side.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Okay. When you first became involved in state politics, were there any key issues or legislation that you wanted to champion or fight against?
Well, yes. Matter of fact, my very first vote was on the Equal Rights Amendment.
Oh.
And that was the, let's see, Indiana passed that bill by 1 vote. And of course, I take credit for that, but I campaigned for it. I spoke to the League of Women Voters, and back in the day when sometimes it wasn't so popular. But by golly, it truly did pass by 1 vote, and that was a piece of legislation that Birch Bayh worked on the national level. Regrettably, the Equal Rights Amendment just kind of fizzled after that, and of course it never became reality.
Yeah.
Which to this day I still don't understand why any politician would kill that,
Right.
or stop it, but they did, and so bottom line, I guess I'm going to have to refer back to your first question because the equal rights jumped in my mind and took my other thought away.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, so I was just thinking about what key issues or legislation you championed or fought against.
That's right. I thought, along with the Equal Rights Amendment, we needed stronger ethics and conflicts of interest rules on how government in general, state, local, and at the State House operated, and try to, and matter of fact, I think, I grabbed one of my brochures here. Well, yeah, here's, I worked on utility reform legislation when Public Service Indiana was putting a surcharge on anytime they wanted to. It's called a fuel adjustment clause. And whatever they asked for, they should be they should be held in check and be able and made to go before a commission to justify an increase, since they held a public license. And we did finally get rid of the fuel adjustment clause. I think it took us 2 years or maybe 3 to get it done. And I thought the property tax on inheritance tax was pretty much an unfair tax, and I didn't author that legislation, but I voted to repeal it because it just seemed like double to triple taxation, and especially on family farms and family businesses.
Yeah.
So that finally fell to the wayside, and and one personal accomplishment, I was able to maintain a 100% voting record in the House all 3 of my terms, which is not an easy feat.
Yeah, okay.
Because I took my work very seriously and received the Outstanding Freshman Legislator Award from the State Public Employees Association my freshman year as well, and then co-sponsored the motorcycle safety and licensing law that we now have, as I mentioned before. I did. Ironically, I didn't serve on I did serve on, the State Education Committee as an official request from my dear mother. She said, "Son, you know an awful lot about education, both from your dad being on the school board and me being a longtime teacher." And I would come over, or she would be willing to come over to the legislature. And she did come over a few times, and of course they didn't know her background like me, but they knew she was my mother, and they paid her due respect, and she helped motivate some legislators to work on some subjects that, especially to help the disadvantaged and the those who had learning disabilities.
Okay.
And later on, there became, I think, after I had left the legislature a year or two, a major reform in that category, which started off several years before the fact. Because usually by the time you introduce something on a new subject, in the old days anyway, the firstborn concept of legislation that's introduced, of major impact potential, takes about 3 to 4 years to get it tweaked and all the way through the legislature.
Right.
If it's ultimately going to pass.
Yeah.
So it's a long, drawn-out process when you're working on the meat and potatoes of the key subjects.
Yeah.
And obviously then there are whims that come along, we didn't realize that the license branches were pocketing state money for the benefit of the local party. Sounds kind of stinky, but we couldn't even get it done in the legislature, but the federal judge did it for us. So,
yeah.
And of course, then it changed after that by that judge's order. But anyway, any other questions?
Yeah, I have a few.
Okay.
Yeah, so thinking back to the Equal Rights Amendment, can you kind of put it in perspective what exactly the big debate is about for people who are going to listen to this in the future? And so, what were the main concepts being thrown out there and for the bill and against the bill?
Well, that is taking me back to 1976 and before.
Yeah.
To me, it just seemed like an obvious gimme that there should be equal rights for men and women. And of course, there was an amendment that pertained to that in part already, but the fact that supposedly they wanted it clarified, absolutely. So I really can't tell you the opponents of. I can remember some of the words that were spoken against it, but they struck me as being illogical and kind of two-faced.
Okay.
The way it was put.
Yeah.
And so to this day, I'm still at a loss as to why it's still just floating out there and kind of fallen to the wayside. Because it should be something obvious that is needed and clarified and made an amendment and move on.
Sure. Yeah.
It truly is mind-boggling.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like that it's just kind of gone away at this point. So.
Right. Yes, and Urge By gets a lot of credit for having authored it on the federal level and pushed it with the groups that were behind it to get it made a nationwide issue. And then, after he got out of politics, it just, in part, I think that contributed to it. There just wasn't anybody there to pick it up and run with it, or however they thought on the federal level at that point. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Okay. See, when you were running your campaign, did you have like a particular message that you were reiterating to potential constituents and stuff?
Well, first of all, I always had a campaign platform, and I listed what I called my background and experience and family roots in the district, and that I certainly took a strong voice in the area of drunk driving. In the old days, the drunk driving threshold was 0.15 alcohol before they could arrest you, and then we got it down to 0.10. I want to say around 1978 or 9, and then we got it down to 0.08 in the last term I served, where it is currently. And luckily, there was a direct impact of injuries and fatalities to, basically cutting it in half, because a first-time drinker on 0.15 could easily be intoxicated.
Yeah.
Because they're not used to alcohol, let alone, and it may be two drinks, 3 drinks, that they're totally unfit to drive. So it took an education and a pretty strong lobbying effort. I worked and tried to help them in finding a better way to do the intoxilizing test, so when the alcohol level came down, it wouldn't discriminate, based upon different factors that come into play in how those machines read, because there was a couple of quirks in the intoxilizers when they changed those, and so I saw some unfairness on the other side of the coin that needed changed. But the 0.08 law stands, and I don't take full credit for it, because Senator, I think, can't remember, Fort Wayne was one of the big promoters behind it, along with the what were called the Mad Mothers Association.
Okay.
And I listened to them a lot over here in Terre Haute, and I always acknowledged that education matters on all levels of school. K through 12 were very important. As I told you, I would testify before the education committee, but I would rarely get involved directly in them if they were involving elementary schools, like my mother's school. But I enjoyed working with both sides behind the scenes to make better bills. I think, if I remember right, at one session I introduced a whistleblowing bill that I think that came shortly after the license branch lawsuit had been, and I knew there were people around the state that had stories to tell, and needless to say, I had a tough time getting that bill through, because I'm sure they wanted most of those stories buried permanently. And they said, "Oh, you've already got the license branch reform, Darrell. Why are you messing around with the whistleblowing?" I said, "Well, Dennis Avery and I were whistleblowers, and you people gave us a lot of hell when we were trying to do the right thing. And so whistleblowers need some protection if they're legitimate, and you check it out." And so I couldn't tell you the current status of the state law on it, but that led to some frustration on my side, as you can imagine. And I purposely stayed away from anything to do with the judiciary or the practice of law. I left that to the American Bar Association and the State Bar Association, but I would attend their functions and listen to changes they wanted to make, especially in the child abuse arena, because that was a pet peeve of Dennis Avery, and he and I mentioned him before. Dennis was one of the lifesavers in the child abuse area. He really went to bat, like various areas as well in different arenas. But he was like a legislator, whistleblower, trying to improve things to curb child abuse and make things better for the people in those circumstances.
Yeah, okay. Interesting, wow. Thinking again about your first election, what did you think of the election process? Did it seem pretty orderly and sophisticated and worked well, or?
I did, yes. I thought it was. Matter of fact, I think I got. I don't remember the exact number, but I got like 12,900 votes, and my opponent had like 9,000 votes, which was considerably different than before, and the other two were not quite that lopsided, but fairly close to it as far as the 50th district was concerned of my district. And but in general, I felt that the elections were certainly substantially different than when I got the Attorney General's opinion, because I knew the absentee voting had ceased in that format, and they were following the law, and I think the law was even tweaked to make it stronger than it was before.
Yeah. Because
of those abuses. So in general, I was satisfied that there was parity and fairness in the election system, and we had pretty good county clerks for the most part, and they play a crucial role in keeping it fair and being a checkmate on the political party chair people that the license branch had created. So when that was gone, that helped change it too.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. And so, how did you feel when you first found out that you won the election?
Well, I was elated to say the least. I, I probably went to sleep that night thinking I should have won, but I probably won't.
Okay.
Just because I was a newcomer, but I knew in my heart all the people that told my mom and dad and my brother and sister and myself and my friends that they were going to vote for me, that I had a fighting chance. But I didn't think it would quite turn out to be. I wouldn't call it necessarily a landslide, but it was a good victory.
Yeah. Sure.
And I think it spoke for the people too, because I think the people that knew me knew I was just a grassroots. I hope to say, I don't mean this self-serving the way it sounds, down-to-earth kind of person.
Yeah.
I would listen to anybody about anything and try to help them if I could, because that's one reason why I wanted to be a lawyer to begin with. And I think I developed a good relationship there, and carried it to Greencastle as well, and statewide for that matter. I've probably practiced in 2/3 of the counties in the state, including murder cases. So that's a lot of territory for a small law firm.
Yeah. Sure. That makes sense. And what were your first thoughts when you walked into the State House for your first official day in office?
Well, I had to ask John Thomas where the bathroom was.
Yeah.
Literally. When I drove up, I didn't know where to park. Of course, I'm a freshman. It's the first day.
Yeah.
So I pulled all the way up to the north door of the State House, and there was a guard there. And I said, "Sir, I need to know where I park." And he was real nice. He says, "Are you a freshman legislator?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And I gave him my house number, 99. So he said, "Well, I hate to tell you, you're on the very last row across the street." And I said, "Oh, okay." And he said, "Is this little convertible your personal car?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, Representative Felling, I hate to tell you this, but we've been having problems securing the parking lot when the legislature is in session in the later hours at night, or if you leave your car in your parking spot, which you can, your car might not be there at that spot when you return the next day."
Oh my gosh.
And this is like talking to a kid in the China closet, and I go, "What?"
Yeah.
He said, "Oh, I'm dead serious." He said the speaker's van was parked, and he pointed over to a blank spot. There was no van there then. He said it was just stolen 2 or 3 weeks ago, and they just found it floating down the White River.
Oh my gosh.
I said, you are you serious, sir?" And he said, "Unfortunately, yes. And security forces, we're going to try to make it better." So he said, "If you got another car, I'd recommend you drive it, especially because that rag top's not going to do it. It probably won't even be here in 2 days if you continue to drive it." So that impression was kind of a shocker.
Yeah.
Even though I knew law and I knew how things like that need to be dealt with, but the bottom line, I didn't expect to have it put in my face right off the get-go.
Yeah, that's a
So,
wow.
but I can say that 90% of the people plus were courteous, friendly, helpful, despite our differences as legislators, and the staff were good people. Very few problems in that regard, and especially when I got in leadership, I had to, do some of those interviews and do that type of work for the party and the caucus. And so in general, It got better after the first day, is all I can say. And it got, for the most part, better every day thereafter to some degree.
Yeah. That's right. Right. I guess you never got your car stolen, so that's good.
Yes, sir. I did trade the car, though, not too long after that, just because I couldn't afford a third one.
Right. Okay. How would you know the needs and wants of your constituents?
Well, it was, let's see, that brings to mind, I had an old campaign slogan. See if I can find it. I've got this one brochure here. I'll even mail to you if you want. It was...
Sure, that'd be interesting.
From, let's see, 1980, and I don't know. Let's see. Excuse me, 1978, I guess. But and it's kind of hokey, but it said first billboard, and on my brochure, listening to you, working for you. And I just believed that the legislators' main responsibility was not to say, okay, I got a piece of legislation I want to pass, is to listen to the people to see what they want as legislation, kind of like with the bikers. You know it needs to be made better, but I wasn't a biker, so I'm not the person. I should listen to the bikers and do, in part, what they said, and what they said was very helpful to create the current law. And then go to the State House and work, and then getting it through took, it took every bit of a long session to get it done, as I recollect. I mean, it was, because you have to go over to the Senate, testify, and get a Senate sponsor, and do all those things. So it's a lot of work, but I really felt even back then that the politicians, especially in this county, were running in part the legislative system as well as the local party for personal gain and personal uses versus what's good for the public in general, and what can we do to make our lives better and easier for the workplace and everything else.
Yeah, okay, sure. Do you remember the very first bill that you ever sponsored?
Oh my goodness.
If not, that's okay. I'm just curious.
I know I had a tendency to introduce more bills. I learned after the first session. So the bottom line on getting the bills through, it's I started reducing the number of bills by my second term and certainly third term, and tried to stay in areas of specialty that I felt comfortable in, that I knew something about, like license branch reform or motorcycle driving laws, but I couldn't tell you how many total at this point I introduced and or passed in the totality of how I introduced it.
Yeah, okay. Sure.
And I quickly learned the art of amendment. That was one thing that many legislators I don't think they realize what the power of a good amendment to make a good bill even better is the easiest way to get something done. And like I said, it has to be good, and you don't get very many good ones dropped in your lap, but keep your ears open, your eyes open back home, and you come up with ideas that your constituents need or want. And so I worked, that's why that I wanted to listen to my constituents and then go over there and work for them, and it started at home and ended up at the State House. And that format worked pretty well, all three terms.
Yeah, okay. Interesting, all right. Um, in terms of the General Assembly and kind of how it operates, um, what were the regular interactions like amongst different members of the General Assembly?
I would say very cordial for the most part. I've rarely heard of even, I've never heard of a physical altercation. I never heard people, certainly on the floor of the House anyway, use foul language. I mean, it was civil back in those days, and I think we all tried to some degree to agree to disagree when we had to, and move on and get it done. Because sometimes you just can't convince everybody of any given one thing as a rule, and especially with so many different issues involved in even simple bills. So it just became one of those things that the civility was overall quite well. I will tell you, by the time we got down to my last term, I felt there was starting to develop some more political friction than I had observed back in '76, and that was another reason why along with the gerrymandering and everything else, that it was time to step aside.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I understand. What about the differences between the House and the Senate? Was it noticeable, or I've heard people in the past say the sort of the atmosphere is a little bit different. Did you get that impression as well?
Yes. I think I never was able to cultivate a relationship with Bob Garton, and he was the President Pro Tem of the Senate during my tenure. I and bills that once I got them through the House, I went over and talked to him about, and I remember at least a few conversations where I could tell right off the get-go that somebody had either already beat me over, i.e. a lobbyist, over to him to say this motorcycle bill, for example, is not a good bill. You really shouldn't do this. So I didn't know how our President Pro Tem, and I call him still that to this day, and I have full respect for him. I've never known him to do anything backhanded or otherwise, or really any legislators do anything that was improper. But I do believe that there was an error in the Senate that they felt like, in some instances, that they were superior, in part because they were the Senate and they were senators, and we were in the House, and we were House members. So
right.
I always felt it to a degree, but I can't say I was ever spoken down to, or I was able to get a bill through. You've got to get it through both chambers. So and I had real good friendships with one of our senator from Terre Haute. His name just came to mind and slipped. Bob. He was also an attorney from Terre Haute. Bob, I apologize to you. I can't think of Bob's last name. So
no worries.
But Bob Meeks.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and now I'm sorry. Bob Meeks is from LaGrange and a Republican, so he was a guy that I would work with on the .08, and I think ultimately Bob took over and helped get the motorcycle law through too. So I think Bob's retired, and then his brother also served in the Senate for a while. But in general, I don't think it was any big issue. At least that was, taunted to me in any way, shape, or form. And I just, and if I did detect any, I usually just ignored it.
Yeah, okay. Do you remember kind of the ways that you would garner support for different legislation you tried to create?
Well, number one, talk to your other legislators from your area. I was instrumental in reintroducing what was called Cracker Barrel sessions during my first term, because they used to have them, I guess, back in the 60s before. And when I found out about them, I thought that's a good way to be listening to your constituents. And I think they still do them to this day here in Vigo County. So that was a very important method of communicating. I would also send copies of bills to groups such as the Terre Haute Board of Realtors when there was something introduced by another legislator that would affect, all the realtors statewide, and then ask them to analyze it. If they had questions, either contact their lobbyist or contact me, and I would go in and if they'd asked me to come speak to a board of directors meeting or membership meeting, I would go and address that bill and make some other general comments about what was going on in Indianapolis. And so I tried to keep the two-way street of communication going on at all times. I even did a call-in radio during session to give a 2-minute review of what took place during the session, the particular days that we were in session. And that was broadcast live on WBOW and WTHI radios, and they did that as a complimentary space to do it, and then they sold advertising for it, to make their money. But I really tried to, especially groups that I didn't know anything about, because obviously, if there's anybody in Indianapolis that says they know every law and they know everything about Indiana, they are full of BS.
Yeah.
Because it's impossible.
Right.
At least for me as a human being. Now, maybe a computer could do it, but bottom line, there are a lot more groups out there, too, than what you can ever imagine, and interest groups. And that's good, because those people and their businesses and their families and their schools and everything else are affected by so many different things that the legislature is responsible for. And the only way you find out things is talk and communicate and try to figure out what's best, and then go to Indianapolis and try to get it done.
Yeah. When you were voting on legislation, did you have a sense of how other people would vote in the General Assembly?
Not always. Usually, once you became personal, or not necessarily personal, but became more knowledgeable of your colleagues, you knew their interest backgrounds, what their vocation was, what they've said to you on bills like that I introduced, and then they would come and say, "Hey, can I co-author that bill with you?" or whatever. And so it was kind of a situation where you worked hard, you tried to get the facts, and people, I found back in those days anyway, both your constituents as well as your fellow legislators and madam legislators did a decent job of communicating and flushing things out before you'd have to take the final vote on a bill. So overall, I was impressed with the, shall we say, the tone of the legislature back then, not necessarily now. I'm not saying it isn't, but all I know is what I read now, and some of that's not so gracious. But I do believe that I still believe in mankind. I still believe in it. It's probably works as well as any other form of government that I know of or have ever heard of, and certainly was glad to be a part of. So I think that sums it up.
Yeah, okay. Sure. Let's see. How influential would you say party leadership was to determining whether legislation would pass or not?
Very important.
Okay.
I can think of on the riverboats, for example, and the casinos, and the tavern owners wanting to legalize their what they call cherrymaster machines for taverns and bars to help the little guys, which I tried to help them on that. The riverboats and casinos carried a big stick, and how they got it done, I have no idea. I just know that at one point we thought we had enough votes to pass, and we got it through the House, that we could get that bill through the Senate, and that would help every little mom and pop shop with be they a liquor store or a tavern or a restaurant with a liquor license, and already have strict laws they have to comply with, and let that money be dispersed, the profit that is, in part, to the many people out there for the state of Indiana. But in the end result, when the governor announced his support for the riverboats, that was pretty much it. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with what happened, because I don't know. But it was, I didn't think the best decision for the general public and the people of Indiana, and certainly the small business owners of Indiana. So that's one you have to mark up for the giver, I guess.
Yeah, okay, sure. Did you ever kind of butt heads with party leadership at all during your time?
Ironically, no. My party, I mean, the Democrat Party treated me just like one of themselves. I mean, they didn't know all my background. Even after I filed the lawsuit, most of them came to me and said, you know, we got a dirty, rotten party county chairman back at my home county, and I can't believe they took some of their money and donated it to my opponent the last election.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that kind of hits close to home. So
yeah,
I heard different things from time to time, and but you know, nothing that was scandalous or out left field, in my opinion.
Right. Sure. And it sounds like the relationship between Democrats and Republicans when you served was decent. It didn't seem like it was too toxic.
It was not too toxic at all. When what was the doc's name that was governor of Indiana? Doc Bowen. Mm-hmm. When Doc Bowen, I could go in his office. I mean, I'd call, make an appointment, and he knew I was from Terre Haute. I mean, he knew me as a Democrat, and I think had already left the governorship before I got into leadership. But that man was much like Frank O'Bannon, just down to earth, a wonderful person, a great physician, a great speaker, and I never heard one complaint about him
Yeah.
in our caucus. And if you're going to hear complaints, the minority party would be complaining about the other party's speaker. So I was amazed of overall how well the system worked. It still needs improvement. Has needed improvement in certain areas like gerrymandering for seems like forever. And I'm sure there are new issues over there now that I'm not aware of that probably need to address too. But I just hope and pray that key word of civility comes back.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's there from the local legislators here I've been talking to. I run into them and we share stories and I always ask what the latest at the State House, and usually I get a pretty good earful of the same old not so good reports.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's going to change, but how, when, and where, and I couldn't give you a clue, I don't think, at this point.
Sure. No, I understand. What would you say what was the most controversial legislative issue when you served, in your opinion?
Most controversial? Boy, that covers a lot of turf.
Yeah, I bet.
I don't know if I could really pick one out. The gaming arena became very potent during the last year I was there, and the riverboats passed the year before legislation, and there was a lot of talk about that. But in general, it seemed like sometimes the controversial ones were the least I'll give you one, comes to mind, is legalizing Laetrile. Have you ever heard of the so-called cancer medicine?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, well, we had a bill introduced to legalize Laetrile in Indiana, and I got a ton of mail on it. Back then, our Democrat long-term mayor, I think 6 terms, Mayor Ralph Tucker, even came over and paid a visit to me when he found out I was going to vote against it. And he said, "Darrell, I have cancer, and I've gone to every doctor I know, and some tell me the only place I can go now is to Mexico or wherever it was they made that. I can't remember now, but he said, please, for me, will you change your vote?" And I got along with the mayor just fine. He was, an interesting person and a good guy. And I finally said to him, the reason I'm not voting for this is because my family doctor and several of the doctors' associations in the state have sent us letters, including the one doctor in the House, Ned Lampkin, who is against the bill because he says people won't get the proper treatment and they're getting a false hope with the Laetrile.
Yeah.
And finally, I had to go with the medical profession on a medical issue versus my good old friend, the mayor. And it hurt. It hurt for me to do it, but I felt that there was going to be more harm done by people getting false treatments or false hope versus the real medicine. And of course, we're still fighting that battle.
Yeah.
Even though I did hear they had some kind of a breakthrough on breast cancer recently. American Cancer Society sent me a postcard about it.
Okay.
I was pleased to hear that. But anyway, so I would say probably Laetrile and the gaming would be the 2 big areas.
Yeah, sure.
And the Laetrile was kind of drug out the whole session before they realized they weren't going to be able to get the votes, and went ahead and put it on the board, but and they didn't get them. But I still felt bad voting against it, but I felt like I had to represent a majority of my constituents and do what medically and morally seemed to be right.
Right. Let's see. What would you say was the biggest hurdle you had to overcome during your time in office?
Well, from coming from Vigo County, Terre Haute, which has always been kind of a stepchild to Indianapolis. Not saying that's all bad, but if it weren't for the Holman family, we definitely would have been one. Being a little bit naive growing up on the farm as I did, about politics in general, except for my dad's experience, and it was good. It was like walking into a whole new world that I really had no general comprehension of.
Yeah.
Until I got in there and rolled up my sleeves and went at it and did my work, and took a few lumps on some bills and won some bills, and felt like overall the way the people treated me back home was they thought I was doing a good job, and reelected me 3 times, having both the Democrats and the Republicans trying to beat me.
Yeah.
Each year, or every other year, I should say, and then getting in party leadership my final year. So I just I thought as being an attorney I would have a little bit of an advantage of the general knowledge, but the judiciary and the legislative branches are 2 totally separate. Let me assure you. So while I understood the legal terms, I didn't understand the legislative terms, as always.
Yeah.
So, but on the other side of the coin, I think I could identify with a lot of average people and down-to-earth people, and people who wanted to do good and do right and do it by the book. And I'm sure I left a little bit of that over there for other people to absorb and carry on.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. So I have a specific question based on some research I did, and then I have a few big picture questions, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay.
If that sounds good to you.
Yes.
Okay. So I saw that you had worked on a bill, something about preventing convicted felons from lobbying. Do you remember anything about that?
I don't think I authored it. I may have co-authored it.
Yeah, I saw your name in the newspaper about it, but I wasn't sure exactly your role.
I never, as I said earlier, I never served on the Judiciary Committee. I was asked to, or anything dealing with the practice of law in general, because I didn't want it to seem as a conflict of interest, from my own personal point of view or practice point of view. So, but I may well have voted for that. Conceptually, I wouldn't feel that way these days. I could say that. Because I'm a little broader minded than I was then, and I, by the way, at the time I was there, I think in my second term, I was the youngest legislator elected in my class of, I guess, 76. It was either 76 or 78, I can't remember.
Yeah. So
being that young as well, I had a lot to learn. And I tried to do it expeditiously and from the right people, and all I can say is I tried my best.
Sure. Yeah, no, I understand. Do you have, I know you've already told some stories, is there a particular favorite story that comes to mind from your time as a legislator?
Oh my gosh, I guess I'd have to think on that one.
No worries.
Probably Well, yes, I do. I have one of my favorite pictures. Of course, you have pages, and John Thomas, the legislator I mentioned before, he would even drive his pages over to the State House and drive them back home afterwards. I mean, he was that dedicated. I had a lot of requests for pages, and I got as many in as I could, but I finally got my mother to come over, and got the Mike Phillips to agree to let me introduce her as a special person, special occasion type deal, and she couldn't even pull the microphone down low enough because she's only 5'2".
Mm-hmm.
Pull it down low enough that it would amplify her voice. So they went over and gave her a chair and let her kind of raise up off that a little bit so they could hear her. She only just did a small greeting. It wasn't a speech or anything. But she was so tickled, and the photographers got some great pictures of her. And on a personal level, that was... and then I also sponsored Larry Bird when we were runner-ups to the national championship in '79.
Oh, okay, wow.
It was cool having him over there and the team and coach and everybody. And of course, I knew Larry before and after, and I haven't seen him since he relocated. But bottom line, I put those two, and of course, there's a world of difference between Larry Bird and my mother, but especially in height. But
yeah.
Anyway, those would be mine I can think of off the top.
Sure, okay. What lessons would you say you learned from your experiences in the General Assembly?
Well, probably to rarely use the word never and rarely use the word always.
Yeah.
and to lay aside your fears and of the unknown, because if you don't dive into what your work is at hand, and being a legislator, as the old saying is like a meat grinder analogy, it has some similarities certainly. So I can say that you just need to be versatile, be open, be honest, be faithful, be true, and admit when you're wrong. Because I was wrong on several things. Well, more than several, probably more than I even can remember at this point.
Okay.
But always be willing to listen a second time around, and just like with the pickers, and by golly, keep trying, and eventually progress can and will be accomplished.
Yeah, sure. Do you have any regrets as a legislator?
I really do not. I mean, I'm sure I know one reason why I got elected as assistant minority leader was because I was a little bit of an orator.
Okay.
And when the House passing a big budget that the Democrats were strongly opposed to, during the even years, that was, I don't know if that was the 78 budget or the 80 budget, but anyway, I got up and used Fantasy Island analogy of saying, well, over on this side of the aisle we have the residents of Fantasy Island, and over on this side we have the workers of Fantasy Island, and over on this side we have the Fantasy Island people flying their planes in with all of their high rollers and people that know it all, and over here on the left side we have the intellectuals and the people who've been there and done it. And then I yelled the sound of what wasn't real close to a plane, and then I said, and guess what, gang? There's the plane, and it's going to the Republican side. And they howled their lungs out, and then a few other times legislators would ask me to speak against a piece of legislation that they were strongly opposed to, but they didn't want to get up and talk on it for whatever reason. And
Yeah.
so I just tried to be helpful where I could. I certainly wasn't the best orator, but by far in the legislature. There were many good ones and many better than me, but I just had my own kind of farm background way of saying some stuff that
Sure.
they kind of liked.
Sure, okay. What was your proudest moment as a legislator?
Well, probably, and I know it was just more of a token than anything, but when the I guess the Indianapolis Star sponsored it, but when the publications that covered the news, the State House during session, took the vote my freshman year, and I mean, I was low man on the totem pole, as I told you, and
Yeah.
seat number 99, and virtually unknown by the Democrats on my side, and John Thomas was the only one I knew on the Republican side personally, was getting the Outstanding Freshman Legislator of the Year award. And that was Democrat legislator, because they give a Republican one too. And I just thought that was kind of special for somebody they never heard of, and gave me a little credibility beyond the norm, I guess.
Yeah, that's a cool accomplishment to have. Yeah. What advice would you give to future legislators or even current legislators?
Well, be as humble as you can, despite your successes, because success speaks for itself, number one. And number two, always be honest, be truthful, even to the degree that it hurts inside, because you can always count on the truth to come through most of the time, but the others will never come through. Most of them will bite you.
Yeah.
And lastly, I guess, be true to yourself, your friends, your family, and to our country.
Yeah, sure. What, in your opinion, is the most important work of the Indiana General Assembly?
Well, in a nutshell, try to pass good legislation that helps most people. Try to defeat legislation that hurts people where it can be avoided or done a different way. And in general, listen to people and really listen, to the point that, as an example, I would get phone calls even late at night at my home. I live on 7th Street, and my alley's full of chuck holes. I'm just sick of this, Mr. Felling. Isn't there something you can do about it? And so I finally wised up and put out a little flyer before they become numerous these days, and put a list of city offices and departments and who's responsible. You know, here's the street commissioner's name and phone number at City Hall, and here's who's responsible for this, that, and the other. And a lot of people said, gee, that was very helpful. Can't even find it correctly in the phone book. And I made one phone call, and my alley got taken care of the next day. So I couldn't have done that as a legislator. So it's communication with your fellow human beings and your citizens and your constituents.
Yeah, sure.
Communication is the bottom line. And if you can't communicate, you don't belong there. And if you don't want to communicate, you don't belong there. But if you want to help and you can communicate, you need to be there. Because we have people doing a tough job, and we need it done better than it is now.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes total sense. See, last few questions here. What does the public not know about the Indiana General Assembly and how it operates?
Well, I would say there's a lot more they don't know than what they do know, and that's just because the legislative process is difficult to follow. When you get down to crunch time, when the real things happen, they're in recess 90% of the time. So if you even went over there and sat for a week, they may not even be in session that week. It's very difficult to follow legislation without having, an axe or dog in the race, so to speak. And so I think I like the way people still go to our Cracker Barrel sessions here locally, and I'm sure statewide to some degree, because that's a good way to get answers to questions of things they've heard about in Indianapolis or read in the paper from their own legislators. And I think many legislators are very conscientious about communicating in general with their newsletters, etc. So I just think communication has to be not just one way either. It needs to be a two-way street, and you can make things happen.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. How has the state of Indiana changed over the course of your lifetime?
I guess I'm going to have to ask you on that one. In what respect? You mean as how the legislature's changed, or?
Yeah, the legislature and I guess society overall.
Well, unfortunately, I'm an optimist at heart, but I'm kind of become a little bit more pessimistic in general, from the standpoint that I think people don't take responsibility for their own actions a lot when they should always face the music, so to speak, if they're responsible for whatever happened or need to make a change. I would like to hope that people have a basic faith, and I don't care what denomination, what arena, just that they have a basic faith that's where they're coming from their heart, their soul, or whatever.
Right.
And then treat people the way they would want to be treated by anyone from the doorman to the poor guard that had to tell me my convertible probably would disappear the next day. He was just doing his job, and he did it politely, and I admired him for it. Would always speak to him just for that favor, because he could have easily looked the other way and said nothing.
Yeah.
To a stranger especially. But I think we just have to get back to basic values and beliefs. And if we can do that, progress can be made, and I think common ground can be reached. But it's going to take a new way of doing business, and not all because it has to be political one way or the other, or politically right or politically wrong, or any such thing. I don't know that I ever heard those two terms while I was in the legislature the whole time. Well, I can't say a few people didn't say, well, you're just doing that because it's politically correct. Well, that was a rare bird back in those days. Today, it is the bird.
Yeah.
And that's got to change, because politics never made our government. Our people made our government, and our founders, and our Constitution. So we got to get back to the basics.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think that's put in a nutshell.
Yeah, that makes sense. What, if any, qualities do citizens of Indiana still have or hold dear?
Oh, I have a lot of faith in our fellow Hoosiers. Always have. I believe most people want a job, want to work, if they physically can or do not have any other issues that prohibits them from. I think many people will help, especially if they're asked, and probably more people need to be asked to help those who are helpless, which seem to be coming more and more these days, especially throughout our country. But back here in Indiana, I think for the most part, people are doing their best to make a living, raise their family, raise their kids, get their kids an education, and make and hope that their lives are better than what mine is or yours or our peer group. So I have a lot of confidence that it can still be done and done better than what we've done before.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Last question. What do you want Hoosiers to know about their role when it comes to the function of the Indiana General Assembly?
Well, first of all, they have to remember that the people they vote for and win are the people that are going to be the legislators who are going to be representing them, not the people that lost or they're in some kind of political fight or, like the little thing I told you about me and the judge.
Yeah.
The bottom line is that we all need to get along and bury the hatchet. When the election's over, it's over. My first opponent was a physician, and we ended up becoming best of friends. I went to his funeral. I ate at his house numerous times. He was a huge IU fan. I introduced him to Bobby Knight when my cousin, Coach Ron Felling, coached there in '87.
Okay.
And I even represented Coach Knight in his 2 hunting escapades when he got arrested.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because my cousin was assistant coach. But the bottom line is it's got to be fundamental and communication, ethics. I don't know if that's a forgotten word these days at the State House or not, so I can't emphasize that, but I think the ethics back in my day was pretty good. It had started to go a little downhill because ethics and politics were intermingling, like it's going on now everywhere, it seems.
Yeah.
And we got to get off of that path and get back to business at hand, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And always, fellow Hoosiers, I think, are not afraid of work. They need to know what their task is, and needs to be explained and laid out carefully, thoughtfully, and intelligently. And I think our state has a lot of good people in it that meet those standards. And I hope for a better future than what we have now, and I am an optimist to believe that it can happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, that's all the questions I have. Is there anything that we didn't discuss that you want to mention, or?
I think you've done a superb job of covering everything, and at the sake of being repetitious, I don't want to waste any of your time and effort. I'm personally, as I told you at the outset, when you first contacted me, I was thrilled to have this opportunity. I would hope that many of my colleagues and former colleagues would step up to the plate and take an opportunity to add a little history to where we've already been, so we can figure out where we're going.
Sure.
And where we need to go, because that's why history was my minor at DePaul.
Yeah.
I thought it was important, and I think unfortunately, I'm not sure in the schools these days that it's even being taught, but I hope it is, and being taught the correct way, of course, by the truth.
Absolutely.
So anyway, be that as it may, I thank you very much, and you keep up your good work, and someday I hope to get to meet you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, I appreciate you coming on. It's always good to have new people added to the project, especially with so many interesting things to say.